Well, hello. Today we are going to be talking about subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. Now, we've already discovered that once you have a common denominator with fractions, adding and subtracting is very, very easy. Those denominators act like labels, and then you just add or subtract the numerators. But when you have uncommon denominators like this, a 2 and a 3, then we have to actually make them into common denominators. Like if I have 1/2 and I want to take away 1/3, like I have 3 equal parts and only one of them is shaded, like this is what I have left. But what part of the whole is that? And so what we figured out here is if you change these, you make them into equal parts, oops, so that instead of having 1/2 and 1/3, we change them into equal parts, we now have sixths. And so instead of 1/2, I could actually say 1, 2, 3. So this would be like saying 3/6. And instead of 1/3, I could say 1, 2, 2/6. So if I have, well, let's get rid of this plus. Let's change this to a minus since we're talking about subtraction. Now I have 3/6 minus 2/6. I'm only going to have 1/6 left. So here I had 3/6, take away these two, and if I get rid of those, all I have left is this guy right here. So that's a visual representation of what's happening here, and you can see that this amount here is the same amount as this, right? They're the same amount, about, and that just gets us 1/6. So we were able to get common denominators with these. Here's another quick example. If we had 1/2 and 1/4, we could change everything into fourths very easily. From previous work that you've done, you should be able to realize that between 2 and 4, 4 could be the LCD, the least common denominator, and then we just end up getting 1/4. So let's look at just a couple more of these. If I have 5/6, so let's get sixths on here, and we want to take away 2/3, then I can represent it like this. Here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5/6, and this one's all broken down into thirds, and so here's 1, 2/3. And if I color in the same portion of this, it might look like that, and it might look like this. And now we can see that if I take those away, if I get rid of them, then the only thing that I have left is just this guy right here. There's just one of them left over. And so the difference of those ends up being just 1/6. Right? Our equation that might look like, we could say 5/6 minus 2/3. Well, that could become 5/6 minus 4/6 equals 1/6. Okay. See if you can go ahead and do this one. So maybe like pause it right here and see if you can represent what this looks like. And if you're not quite sure yet, then go ahead and just let the video play and we'll do it here in a second. So here I have 3/4. So first thing I got to do is make this into fourths and make the other one into halves. And if I want 3/4 shaded, there's 1, 2, and 3. The other one I've made it into halves, and I only want one of the halves shaded. Now I know that between 2 and 4, I can make these all into fourths. And if I shade the same amount of them, instead of having 1/2, I now have 2 halves. I still have 3/4. And so if I take that away, I've got my 3/4 here. And if I want to take away 2 of those fourths, these two, if I take those away, you can see that what I'm left with is actually just 1/4 right here. So my equation might look something like this. I could say 3/4 minus 1/2 is the same thing as 3/4 minus 2/2, or sorry, 2/4, and that's just 1/4. Okay. The next one down here, the difference between 5/9 and 2/9. Okay. But I already put a bunch of these in because that just takes a long time. Remember, to get ninths, you actually need 8 of these vertical lines, so 8 equal parts. You can see my parts aren't exactly equal, but that's okay. So if I have 5 ninths, here's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I want to take away 2 of those ninths. Well, the good news is that I've already have equal parts. I don't even really need anything here. I don't have to do any kind of equivalent problem. I don't have to change anything. So I'll just put in my 5, and we'll take away 2 of them. And if you count up what's left, you can see that we have 3 ninths left. And 3 ninths actually does reduce down quite nicely. 3 ninths is just 1/3. So our equation is 5 ninths minus 2 ninths equals 3 ninths. So subtracting fractions doesn't have to be super hard. Once you get your common denominator, then we're just going to do our operation across the top, or subtract the numerators, right? So step 1 is to get common denominator. After you get your common denominator, then you're going to, step 2, subtract the numerators. Okay. By the way, the denominator stays the same, just like when we were adding. And then step 3, just like always with all of our fractions, the last thing you're going to want to do is to simplify. Okay. Don't simplify before you subtract. That's a little thing. Sometimes I see people get common denominators, and then they'll see that they have, they'll have 2/4 minus 1/4, and then they're like, wait a minute, 2/4, I'll make that 1/2, and then they're stuck. So that's why you simplify at the end, not at the beginning. All right, let's do a couple of these now where we don't have to necessarily draw them all out. Okay, so we want to work on getting common denominators. We have to find a common denominator between 27 and 45. So what I might think about doing here is, if you're not sure, we did this in the past where we were looking at trying to find LCDs. I know 9 goes into both of these. 9 goes into 27 3 times, and it goes into 45 5 times. And so now if I just take 9 times 3 times 5, that will equal 105. So my common denominator for these is 105. Now, let's do this in another color. All right, so if I have these 105ths, right, 22 27ths, like what do I take times 27 to get 105? Well, if I take 9 times 3, that's 27. So if I just take it times 5, if I take 27 times 5, then that will get me 105. So that's what I'll do, is I'll just multiply this one times 5. So I take 22, get a little more room here, I'm sorry about that. So we'll take our 22 27ths, and we'll take it times 5 on bottom and top. That's going to make 110. Why did I have 105? That's 135. There we go. Okay. All right. Fortunately, that doesn't really change anything. Okay. So 27 times 5 then is 135. So 22 27ths, when you multiply the top and the bottom by the same amount, you multiply them by 5, then that's going to get our 110 135ths. Now we take 14 45ths, and we gotta say, well, what do we multiply by 45 to get to 105? Well, it just so happens if I take 9 times 5, that's 45, and all I need then is to multiply by 3. So we'll do times 3 times 3. 45 times 3 is 105, And 14 times 3 is 42. So what I have here is I've got 110 1/35 minus 42 1/35. Did I put 105 again? I'm really stuck on that today, huh? There we go. So 110 1/35 minus 42 1/35. And that's going to make 68. I had to think about that one for a minute. 68 1/35. And those two are relatively prime. They don't have anything in common with each other. So 68 1/35 is our answer for that. You can check that on a calculator, but I feel pretty good about that. I'm pretty sure I'm right. All right, next let's come over here. We got to get common denominators. Now you could go through and just start writing them out and be like, okay, 40, 80, 120, 160, 200, and so on. And then do the same thing with 16s, right? 16, 32, 50, 48. Okay, and keep going like this, and you'll get there, right? You'll figure it out eventually, but that way sometimes takes a little bit. Remember, the other thing we talked about was if we have 40 and 16 and we start dividing things out, like I know 8 goes into both of those. That's 5 and 2. That means that 8 times 5 times 2 is 80. If I can change both of these into 80ths, then we'll have common denominators. So let's take our 33 40ths, and we'll multiply that. I know I've got to multiply that by 2 on top and bottom. That's going to make 66 80ths. And then for the other one, I've got my 7 16ths. And I know that 8 times 2 is 16. I just have that 5 left over. So I'll take this times 5 on bottom and top, and that's going to make 35 80ths. So what I want to do here is I'm going to take 66 80ths minus 35 80ths. And we have our common denominators, which means we're just going to be subtracting them. That's going to make 31 80ths. And those are not going to simplify at all. That's just done, just like it is. Okay. All right, the next one here, between 6 and 13ths, there's nothing that goes into 6 and 13, only 1. That means that just 6 times 13, that's going to be our common denominator, and that's 78. So we've got to change each of these into 78ths this time. So I'll take my 1/6, and I'm going to multiply that by 13 on top and bottom. That makes 13 78ths. And I'll take my 2/13, I'm going to multiply that by 6 on top and bottom. That's going to make 12 78ths. Now when I take 13 minus 12 78ths, right? We just leave that denominator the same. That's just 1 78th. Done. Our last one here, 6/7 minus 3/5. So we have another one where 7 and 5 are relatively prime. And so you can kind of almost think of it as like taking the 5 and just multiplying a 5 up on top and bottom here. This is the way a lot of people might think about doing this, so I want to show it to you because it's actually how I do it. If I know these have nothing in common, I'll just take this denominator and multiply it top and bottom. That makes 30 35ths. And this one over here, I'll multiply the 7 on top and bottom. That's 21 35ths. And so 30 minus 21 does come out to be 9 35ths. Those aren't going to simplify. We're done at this point. Okay. So it's all about getting common denominators. If you can do addition, then subtraction is just as easy. Oh, why is it jumping around? Stop jumping. All right. A planar removes a quarter of an inch from a 5/16 inch board. Find the resulting thickness. So what this does, a planer, you can almost think of it like kind of like a sander, only it's going to actually cut it off. Okay, but we have this board, and the board is too thick. The board is 5/16 of an inch, and we're going to take away 1/4. So hopefully you recognize that idea of taking away as subtraction. Also, that's what the whole section is on. And so now what I have is sixths and fourths. And if I want to know what a common denominator is between 6 and 4, I know that 2 goes into that. There we go. So 2 times 3 times 2 is 12. If I can make all of these into twelfths, then I'm good. So what do I take times 6 to get to 12? I would take that times 2 on bottom and top. And that's how I get 10 twelfths. Over here, what do I take times 4 to get to 12? Well, that's going to be a 3. Whatever you do to the bottom, you do to the top. So that's going to be 3 twelfths. So 10 twelfths minus 3 twelfths is 7 twelfths. That's how thick our board will be when we're all said and done. And you should go ahead and put your label on as well. It does say a quarter of an inch, 5/6 of an inch, so 7 twelfths of an inch. That's subtracting with unlike denominators. Always get a common denominator, and then it's easy from there. Next time we're going to be looking at subtracting whole numbers and mixed numbers along with fractions. All right, good luck.